Hello, my friends. Today, I bring you an intense and transformative story, which challenges everything we know about faith, truth, and the sacred scriptures. Have you ever wondered if everything we learn about the Bible came directly from God or has undergone modifications over the centuries? So get ready, because this journey will change your outlook on a lot of things. Before we start, comment here from which city you are watching this video and, of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories like this. Now, let's embark on this surprising revelation together. My name is Enoch Morrissey, and if you ask me, I'll tell you I'm an everyman, a pastor, theologian, and missionary who has spent his life steeped in faith and the interpretation of Scripture. But, at the same time, I carry within me the mark of an experience that transformed my essence. From an early age, I dedicated myself to preaching, instruction, and spiritual care of the faithful, seeking to transmit the divine message as I had been taught. I grew up convinced that sacred words, in their traditional form, were the compass that guided humanity toward salvation. However, life has mysterious ways of showing us that what we think is unshakable is not always, in fact, immutable. I clearly remember a cold morning in Savannah, where the sea breeze mixed with the smell of the ancient trees that adorned the city's streets. As I walked toward my little church, I watched the attentive faces of my parishioners, each with their stories, their struggles, and their hopes. There was a feeling of stability and security, of a consolidated faith that permeated that environment. I believed, without a shadow of a doubt, that I was helping people find a path of light amidst the darkness of the world. However, little did I know that my own journey was about to take an unexpected turn. For years, my days unfolded between fervent sermons, theological debates, and meetings with believers in search of comfort. The walls of my church echoed the words I preached with so much passion, and the always full pews reinforced the conviction that I was on the right path. In the midst of these moments of communion, silent doubts arose, those that hide deep in the soul and that rarely find space to be expressed. I myself was, at times, haunted by internal questions, reflections on the veracity of the interpretations I defended so ardently. One Sunday afternoon, after the celebration of the sacraments, I sat in a small room at the back of the church, where I was able to have a moment of introspection. Shadows danced on the walls, and the distant sound of the wind brought with it a feeling of restlessness. There, amidst the stillness, I began to reflect on the teachings I had absorbed over the years. Was I, in fact, fulfilling the role that God had destined for me? Or were you inadvertently perpetuating errors and distorted interpretations that, over time, became immutable dogmas? While I was sinking into these thoughts, the voice of a believer was heard. Enoch, have you ever stopped to think that perhaps there is more to the Word of God than the texts we read? It was Mrs. Margaret, one of the oldest and wisest parishioners, known for her gentle words and the depth of her advice. His words, simple and sincere, touched me in an unexpected way. She did not question faith, but suggested that the understanding of divinity could be much more complex than that presented in the worn pages of a sacred book. This seemingly trivial encounter sowed in me a restlessness that would come to define the direction of my existence. I felt, at that moment, that I needed to revisit not only the texts, but the very essence of my faith. Internal conversations, long nights of prayer, and moments of deep solitude led me to recognize that the truth, perhaps, resided beyond the already established words. So, I see myself here, telling my story with a sincerity that overflows every line, in the hope that by sharing what I experienced, you, the reader, will also allow yourself to question and explore the mysteries that hide between the lines of faith. Throughout my career as a pastor, the Scriptures have always been my anchor. However, time and experience began to cast doubt on the infallibility of these interpretations. During long, sleepless nights, as I leafed through the Bible in search of answers, an uneasiness grew within me. How could it be possible that, in the midst of so much faith, translation errors and distorted interpretations had infiltrated the sacred texts? I remember one particularly cold night when I isolated myself in my office. The rain gently tapped the window of the small room, creating a hypnotic rhythm that matched the thoughts simmering in my mind. I was confronted with passages that, at first glance, seemed absolute, but which, when read with a critical eye, revealed ambiguities. How can I be sure that what I preach is the truth? I thought, as doubts eroded the security I always had in my beliefs. The next morning, during the church planning meeting, the topic of translations of sacred texts came up. James Whittaker, one of the oldest members of the congregation and a man of respectable faith, raised an unexpected question. Enoch, have you ever stopped to think that the words we read today could have been changed over the centuries? Wouldn't it be prudent to review whether we are truly connected with what God meant? His voice, filled with a sincerity that only experience can provide, echoed in my ears, making me hesitate to respond immediately. But, James, tradition has always been our guide, I replied in a trembling voice, trying to hide the discomfort that his words aroused in me. However, in my thoughts, his words remained fixed. I remembered moments when, in seminars and meetings with other theologians, debates about divergent translations and versions were minimized or even ignored. Why then did this detail seem to be overlooked if it could so profoundly impact the understanding of the divine message? In the days that followed, every meeting, every Bible study turned into an internal battlefield. In conversations with fellow missionaries like Oliver Sterling, who was always guided by tradition, I tried to express my doubts. Oliver, don't you feel that there is something strange about these passages that have always been accepted without question? What if the words we celebrate were the result of a human interpretation, shaped by interests and convenience? I said, while he, with a worried look, replied, Enoch, our faith is based on tradition. Questioning can be dangerous, but I understand that your concern is real. My readings began to take me down unknown paths. I discovered academic studies that pointed to historical discrepancies between different versions of the Bible and intense debates about the translation of key terms. Each page turned into a new layer of doubts, and the feeling of being faced with an enigma intensified. The feeling that something important was being hidden drove me to seek answers, even if those answers could shake the structure of everything I believed. What began as a simple question evolved into a profound search for the authenticity of the divine message. The conviction that faith should be based on direct experience with God and not just the inheritance of human words took root in my heart. Thus, doubt, which many could see as weakness, became a catalyst for my inner journey, an invitation to re-examine, with critical eyes, the foundations of what I considered sacred. After the first internal questions, I was assigned to a mission that would take me beyond the limits of Savannah and confront me with realities very far from those I had always known. I was sent to Africa, a continent of intense colors, vibrant cultures and traditions deeply rooted in faith, where I had the opportunity to teach theology to local pastors. This experience, which at first seemed like just another chapter in my ministerial career, became a true turning point. Upon arriving at a remote village, I was greeted with touching hospitality. The simple houses, made of clay and wood, contrasted with the spiritual wealth that emanated from their inhabitants. It was in this environment that I met James Whittaker, a local pastor whose wisdom went beyond words. On a sunny afternoon, as the group gathered under the shade of a large tree, James approached with a serene but penetrating gaze. Enoch, he began, his voice calm, there is something about the translations we use that intrigues me deeply. How can it be that texts, sacred by nature, have variations that alter the original meaning of the message? Your question, simple and direct, made me hesitate. I had always trusted in tradition and the heritage of sacred writings, but here, in front of a man who lived his faith so intensely, his words raised doubts that I could no longer ignore. James, the versions we follow have been carefully preserved over the centuries, I replied, trying to maintain the conviction of my beliefs, but internally, I felt the seeds of uncertainty germinate. During the following days, while ministering and participating in community activities, conversations with local pastors became moments of intense exchange of ideas. On one of these occasions, after a sermon, a young pastor named Caleb approached and commented, "I have always felt that there is something more in words than those that have been given to us. Perhaps we should seek the essence, the pure truth, of the teaching, without getting caught up in translations that may have been altered." Caleb's words, spoken with the naivety and sincerity of youth, reinforced my concern and made me reflect on the possibility that our interpretations could be far from the real meaning originally intended. As the days turned into weeks, I began to look more closely at the differences between local accounts and official versions of the Bible. The conversations, marked by long discussions around campfires on warm nights, began to reveal a latent tension, the need to preserve faith while questioning its foundations. I myself found myself torn between respect for tradition and the impulse to seek a more authentic truth, which was perhaps hidden amidst interpretations forged over the years. On a morning of prayers, during a moment of collective silence, I felt a deep connection with nature and the ancient gods that, according to the elders, had been replaced by the Christian faith. This feeling of continuity, of a truth that transcends written words, awakened in me the conviction that the path to true understanding of the divine message did not go through the blind repetition of dogmas, but rather through the courage to question and seek a sincere dialogue with the mystery of the sacred. This mission in Africa, full of encounters and dialogues that challenged my beliefs, was one of the turning points in my spiritual journey. Every word spoken, every look exchanged with local pastors, echoed as an invitation to abandon the security of absolute truths and embrace the uncertainty that, in truth, drives us to grow spiritually. On an afternoon when the sun had left behind, heavy clouds, physical and spiritual fatigue accumulated. After a series of intense preaching and heated debates about the doubts that lingered in my mind, I felt an acute discomfort that surprised me. I was alone in my room, reviewing my notes and trying to unravel the enigmas that tormented me, when an intense pain in my stomach invaded me without warning. "No, this can't be happening now," I muttered to myself, trying to ignore the discomfort that was becoming more and more unbearable. The sensation was as if a burning flame consumed every fiber of my being. Suddenly the pain intensified, and my legs felt weak. Reality began to distort around me. The room seemed to spin, and the voice of my thoughts mixed with a deafening silence. In moments, everything around me disappeared. At the exact moment when consciousness seemed to fade away, I felt as if my spirit was detaching from my body. It was an abrupt transition, and at the same time, incredibly serene. I no longer felt the searing pain nor the pressure of time. There was just an immensity, a space where colors merged and sounds became an echo of something distant and soft. "Enoch, are you prepared to see beyond the veil?" A voice, calm and deep, reverberated inside me. I couldn't see where it was coming from, but the question echoed with an authority that invited me forward into unknown territory. In the midst of the vastness, I saw a faint, pulsating light appear in the distance as if it were the beating of a cosmic heart. Driven by a curiosity that surpassed any fear, I began to move towards that luminosity. even without a physical body to support me. Each step seemed to release an emotion that had been pent up my entire life. Memories of sermons, debates, and the doubts that insisted on accompanying me mixed with the feeling of inexplicable freedom. Time lost its meaning, and space was transformed into a whirlwind of images and sensations. Childhood memories, moments of intense faith, and simultaneously, the restlessness of questioning what was always considered sacred. As I approached the light source, the voice appeared again, now closer and more intimate. You know the truth of the scriptures, but you have never allowed yourself to question the flaws in the way they were transmitted. As I listened to those words, something inside me opened like a flower in the sun. The sensations intensified. I was no longer limited by subject matter. Instead, I found myself enveloped by an aura of understanding that defied rational explanation. The pain and fears which until then had accompanied me dissipated, replaced by a deep calm and an unexpected acceptance of the mystery of life and death. At that very moment, I felt like I was on the verge of discovering something that would change not only my faith, but the very essence of existence. The experience was not just a crossing between life and death. It was a revelation, an invitation to look beyond dogma, to find the truth that hides behind every word and every silence. As the near-death darkness slowly turned into an ethereal brightness, I found myself surrounded by a silence that, although deafening, was filled with an inexplicable calm. In this space between the end and the beginning, the light pulsed rhythmically, almost as if it had a life of its own. And then she spoke, not with audible words, but with a resonance that touched the soul. Enoch, are you prepared to face the hidden truth? The question, imbued with authority and tenderness, reverberated in my mind, causing me to question every fiber of what I thought I knew. Around me, the light condensed to form a kind of vibrant parchment, whose letters danced and transformed into images that went beyond any traditional understanding. I remember trying to capture every detail of that vision. Letters unfolded into symbols, forming passages and excerpts from sacred texts that had never been in my hands. In the midst of this visual spectacle, I was able to perceive nuances and meanings that had been obscured by human interpretations. It is not possible that all this knowledge has been lost or distorted, I thought, while the presence, which seemed to envelop me with an invisible embrace, continued to reveal itself. The voice, now softer, replied, "You have always sought the truth in the words of men, but you forgot that the divine essence transcends books and letters. Look and see." With those moments, the parchment turned into a window to the past. In a scene that unfolded like a slow-motion movie, I watched ancient religious leaders and scribes in fervent discussion. In an environment full of tension and fervor, I witnessed how, faced with maps and documents, they deliberated over which words to keep and which to leave aside. One of the scribes, with a stern look, said, "If we change this passage, we will keep order and faith intact, protecting our people from doubt." Another, with a mournful expression, replied, "But aren't we denying the true message of the divine?" As the scene unfolded, I realized this was no simple academic debate. It was the essence of faith at stake, and the truth hidden by human conveniences and interests. The revelation showed that many words, which I could never have imagined, had been changed with the intention of consolidating power and controlling access to sacred knowledge. Sitting on this threshold between two worlds, the revelation impacted me in a profound way. The light intensified, and for a brief moment I could see in detail every trace of the changes that transformed the original texts into mere shadows of what they should have been. The emotion was overwhelming. Silent tears streamed down my face as I took in the magnitude of what was before me. "This is the burden of those who seek the truth," whispered the presence, and I felt a wave of understanding and sadness, mixed with hope. At that moment, I understood that the true essence of the scriptures was not on paper, but in direct experience with the divine, beyond the limits of what human tradition imposed. The revelation not only shook the foundations of my faith, but it also invited me to rethink the value of words and what it really means to know God. The moment the vision of the parchment fell apart, I felt my essence being ripped away from the present time and plunged into a dimension where history came to life. Suddenly, I found myself in early-century Jerusalem, a vibrant city filled with narrow stone streets and markets where the smell of incense and spices mingled with the murmur of voices in ancient languages. There, time did not flow linearly. It unfolded in overlapping scenes, where each gesture, each word spoken, carried a weight that transformed men's faith. As I walked through this historic landscape, I realized I was being led into a center of debate and power. As I turned a corner, I saw a group of religious leaders gathered in a modest room, but imbued with a solemnity that made me shudder. They were surrounded by manuscripts and parchments, and the atmosphere was tense, as if they were about to make a decision that would alter the fate of beliefs forever. "We must alter this passage to ensure that the message remains unshakable," declared one of the elders, his voice firm and determined. "But in doing so, won't we be obscuring the essence of what the divine wanted to convey?" replied another, with an expression of doubt and regret. As the debates intensified, I could see that this was not just a theological disagreement. It was a battle of interests, where the manipulation of sacred texts served to strengthen the power of those who wished to maintain control over the faith of the faithful. In every rewritten word, in every change made, one could see the mark of strategic choices, made to prevent the public from having access to a truth that could free them from domination. I walked silently through the streets, absorbing every detail of the city that seemed to vibrate with the remnants of a primitive and, at the same time, manipulated faith. At every turn, I witnessed heated conversations about the need to maintain order and stability, an order that, in fact, was built at the expense of genuine truth. The scribes, with trembling but determined hands, scratching the manuscripts, symbolized the tension between the desire to preserve a tradition and the inevitable change that the truth reveals. In a moment of pause, I sat on a stone bench near an ancient fountain, where an old man, with eyes that reflected years of wisdom and suffering, approached and spoke softly. "Son, the history of these words is marked by blood and secrets. Each change, each suppressed word, carries the weight of decisions taken not in the name of the divine, but of human power." His words echoed in my soul, reminding me that faith, when manipulated, becomes an instrument of domination. I felt the urgency to understand the reason for such changes, and, at the same time, the sadness of having to witness the distortion of something that should be pure and sacred. When I got up, I decided to follow the old man, who seemed to know every corner of that ancient city. During our walk, he told me stories about secret councils, where religious leaders met to discuss which passages should be adjusted to protect the faithful, or, as he put it, to maintain order in the chaos of doubts. Each account was a poignant portrait of the manipulation of Scripture, revealing a dark facet of a faith that, at its core, was supposed to be liberating. This trip to the past, full of intense debates and ethical dilemmas, showed me that the manipulation of sacred texts was not the result of chance, but of deliberate choices. As I observed each detail, the realization that the truth had been compromised deepened, leaving me with a bittersweet feeling of discovery and outrage. Leaving ancient Jerusalem, my journey took me to an imposing cathedral that, although grandly built, exuded an atmosphere of tension and intrigue. This cathedral was not just a place of worship, but a true stage where power and theology met, confronting each other in a game of interests that had long gone beyond the purity of faith. Its high walls and colorful windows seemed to hold the secrets of countless generations, each stone imbued with decisions that shaped religious history. Upon entering the sacred precinct, I was immediately enveloped by an aura of formality and reverence, but also of dispute. Groups of theologians and academics met in discreet corners, fervently debating topics that went beyond spirituality. Their conversations, whispered vehemently, echoed through corridors adorned with relics and paintings that testified to centuries of tradition. Among them, I was able to hear excerpts of a dialogue that had a profound impact on me. Faith, as an institution, needs a solid foundation to maintain social order, even if that means adapting Scripture to the winds of change. But the divine essence cannot be held hostage by political interests or by an elite that fears the truth. We are losing connection with what really matters. These words, exchanged amid looks of suspicion and nods of agreement, showed that modern theology was transforming into a battlefield where politics, economics, and power were intertwined with spirituality. Each argument defended seemed like a shield erected to protect a tradition that, in many cases, became a prisoner of dogmas and the interests of a few. Walking through the corridors of the cathedral, I came across a meeting room where renowned theologians, some with stern faces and others with expressions of melancholy, were analyzing ancient manuscripts. The leader of this group, a man with a penetrating gaze and a measured voice, declared with conviction, "We cannot allow faith to be lost in merely academic debates. We must, yes, revisit the texts, but without giving up our responsibility to guide the faithful on a safe path." These words contrasted sharply with the restlessness I felt. In a parallel conversation, a young academic with a restless expression asked, "But what is the cost of this security? If we continue to adjust the Scriptures to maintain order, we will be caged in a system that suppresses true, divine revelation." As I watched this dispute, I realized that the cathedral represented a kind of microcosm of the contemporary religious world. The influence of religion, in its attempt to adapt to modern times, had become a labyrinth where theology mixed with politics, creating invisible barriers that prevented a direct connection with the sacred. Each adjustment, each decision made there, seemed to have as its objective not so much the protection of faith, but the consolidation of a power that had been perpetuated over the centuries. I left the meeting room with the feeling that true spirituality was being eclipsed by the need to control knowledge. The structures that should be bridges between man and the divine became walls that separated the faithful from the essence they always sought to understand. In a last dialogue I heard as I left the room, one of the theologians muttered to himself, "If faith becomes a mere tool of domination, it will lose its light and go out, leaving us in the darkness of ignorance." These words echoed in me as I walked back through the corridors of the cathedral, carrying the bitter realization that the influence of religion, throughout history, had been shaped by human interests, compromising the purity and authenticity of the divine message. After leaving behind the cathedral filled with debate and intrigue, my soul cried out for a refuge where the truth could be discovered in its purest form. My journey took me to a colossal library, a sacred place forgotten by time, where the original, unadulterated texts rested in silence. Upon entering this vast sanctuary of knowledge, I felt as if each shelf, full of ancient manuscripts, pulsed with the energy of the truths that were stored there. The environment was permeated with an aura of mystery and reverence. The smell of aged paper and faded inks permeated the air, while the soft light of colorful stained glass filtered through the tall windows, creating patterns that danced over the faces of the few scholars who gathered there. It was in this scenario that I met Thomas Whitman, a man with a serene gaze and a compassionate voice, who seemed to have dedicated his life to uncovering the secrets hidden within those pages. "Welcome, Enoch," said Thomas, approaching, with a smile that conveyed both welcome and wisdom. "I have always believed that, to find the truth, we need to look beyond what has been manipulated by men," he added, gesturing to the endless rows of books and parchments. We sat down at a solid wood table where Thomas began sharing stories about rare documents and manuscripts that had never been exposed to the public. In a low, slow voice, he described how, over the centuries, certain passages had been changed to maintain control and order within the church. Each change, he claimed, was recorded in discreet notes in the margins of the texts, as if the scribes had secretly left clues for those who wished to discover the true essence of the divine word. "See, Enoch?" muttered Thomas as he opened a manuscript with yellowed pages. "The word that many believe to be unquestionable has, in its origin, countless variants. This document was written before any manipulation we know today. It reveals the original intention of the texts before human interest interfered." As he flipped through the pages, I could see minute details, distinctive handwriting, symbols and notes that indicated revisions made at crucial historical moments. The environment, filled with an almost sacred silence, intensified the feeling that we were touching something of inestimable value. Amid this atmosphere, Thomas shared his discoveries with a restrained but undeniable passion. Every word, every stroke of this manuscript carries the truth that many have forgotten to seek. Here, the words were not edited to comfort or control, but to convey the pure message of the divine as it was originally revealed. As I absorbed every word, the revelation hit me with the force of an epiphany. I remembered the doubts that haunted me and the questions that silently emerged in my soul. Now, faced with texts that had not been contaminated by centuries of manipulation, I felt the hope of recovering a direct connection with what had once been sacred. In a more intimate dialogue, Thomas confided, "Many fear the truth, Enoch, because it requires courage. But it is in truth, however hard it may be, that we find spiritual freedom. If we allow dogma to shape our faith, we will lose the essence of what it means to truly know the divine." His words resonated as a call for a new way of understanding faith, an understanding that was not limited to traditions, but was based on an incessant search for truth. There, in that library, among the books and echoes of the past, I felt that my mission was changing. I would no longer be a simple preacher of immutable doctrines, but a seeker of truth, willing to challenge established narratives and follow a path towards a more authentic faith. After the library's revelations, my search for the truth took me to a place with an oppressive atmosphere and full of secrets. The Hall of Decision. Makers. This space, hidden in the meanders of an old convent, was the stage where enigmatic, hooded figures gathered to deliberate on the fate of faith. Upon entering the hall, I felt a chill run down my spine, as if each stone there carried the weight of the decisions that shaped religious history. The hall was vast and austere, with raw stone walls and large narrow windows that barely let in daylight. In the center, a long oak table stood, surrounded by dark chairs, all occupied by stern-looking men and women, whose faces remained hidden in the shadows of deep hoods. The air was filled with a silence that seemed to scream secrets, and every movement was measured and charged with meaning. As I walked hesitantly, one of the decision-makers spoke in a firm but distant voice, breaking the silence. The balance of faith must be preserved. Every word, every verse, carries a burden of responsibility that cannot be neglected. The speech echoed in the room, and I could notice that, even in the midst of so much obscurity, there was an air of conviction that commanded respect. I sat discreetly in one of the shadows, trying to absorb the details of what was being discussed. The decision-makers debating were not mere scholars. They were the guardians of the interpretations that supported the power and structure of the church. In an almost conspiratorial tone, a female voice rose. Subtle changes in the scriptures were, on many occasions, essential to maintain the unity of the faithful. Without such adjustments, disorder would arise, and faith would lose its social function. Another decision-maker, in a harsh voice full of authority, replied, "But the integrity of the sacred word has been compromised. We cannot sacrifice truth in the name of order. Manipulation, however well-intentioned, poisons the essence of the divine." The debate intensified, and each argument revealed the tension between the preservation of faith as an instrument of control and the commitment to the original truth of sacred texts. During the discussion, I was able to observe that the words chosen were carefully considered, as if each sentence had the power to rewrite history, and with it, the destiny of the souls that were there. In a moment of pause, one of the decision-makers, whose trembling voice betrayed an internal conflict, confided to a colleague, "I feel that by deciding on these changes, we are determining not just the interpretation of the texts, but the direction of the faith of entire generations. Are we truly acting to protect the sacred, or are we just perpetuating our own fears and ambitions?" These words, almost whispered, resonated in my mind and awakened a feeling of revolt and sadness. There, in the heart of that room, I understood that the decisions made were the result of a power game, where truth was often sacrificed in favor of stability which, in turn, fueled domination. I, who sought the purity of divine revelation, helplessly watched this ritual, where each change was justified as a necessary evil. The tension reached its peak when one of the decision-makers, with a penetrating look even from under his hood, declared, "Faith, to remain intact, must be guided by those who understand its secrets, and we, who hold this knowledge, are responsible for its evolution." As the words hung in the air, the room seemed to contract into a silence filled with resignation and fear. There, in that room, the fate of countless believers was decided by a hidden elite, far from the eyes and hearts of those who yearned for a genuine, unmanipulated faith. As the secretive atmosphere of the Hall of Decision-Makers dissipated into a haze of restlessness, my spirit found itself drawn into a silent void where time and space seemed to have dissolved. In this liminal state, where reason gives way to mystery, I came across a powerful and serene presence, which emanated an intense yet welcoming light that seemed to embrace my entire existence. "Enoch," whispered the voice, now without. Artifice or riddles, but with a clarity that touched the soul. "You searched for answers in the words and decisions of men. Now, the time has come to confront the truth that lies beyond dogma." These words, loaded with deep meaning, echoed in my being as I found myself standing before an imposing figure, whose face remained indistinct, but whose essence radiated compassion and wisdom. It was not a human figure, but the personification of the divine, a reflection of pure truth that transcends all interpretations and conventions. Amidst a silence that seemed eternal, the presence continued. "Faith is not meant to be controlled or limited by human interpretations. It is an intimate and personal path, a journey of discovery that is only complete when one looks within." I felt a wave of emotion and relief course through my being, as if every accumulated doubt, every tear of disappointment, and every question had finally found its space to dissipate. Silent tears rolled down my face as I absorbed the revelation that truth was not found in immutable texts or elite decisions, but in direct experience with the divine. "But why did you show me all this? What is the purpose of this whole journey?" I asked, my voice choked with emotion, trying to understand the meaning of each step taken. The answer came in an almost imperceptible whisper. "You spent your life defending what you believed to be the truth, but you got lost in the words of men. Today, understand that true faith is not built on dogmas and conventions, but on a direct relationship with the sacred, which is renewed every moment." At that moment, I felt my doubts transform into renewed certainty and, at the same time, a call to a life of introspection and spiritual freedom. The presence, as if noticing my awakening, approached, and for a brief moment, I felt as if its invisible hands were touching my heart, filling it with an indescribable peace. As the light began to intensify and the voice faded, I was slowly pulled back to reality. The transition was subtle, almost as if I were waking up from a deep dream. But I carried the indelible mark of that revelation. When I opened my eyes, I realized I was in Savannah again, in a moment of post-reflection silence, with the world around me seeming to have taken on a new hue. With my heart transformed and my mind full of new convictions, I understood that my mission would not be to transform the world through writing or imposing preaching, but through the daily experience of a faith that challenges the limits of conventionality. I walked the streets of Savannah with a renewed outlook, aware that despite the countless obstacles, the search for truth is a personal and continuous journey, a journey that invites us to rethink, question, and above all, connect directly with the divine.